Imagine for a moment that in just a few days, everything you worked so hard to build, everything you cherished with love, simply vanished. Your home, your achievements, your livelihood, and worse, the people you love the most. What would you do in the face of such an unbearable loss? For many, that would mean the end of hope. But for one man in the 19th century, Horatio Spafford, it became the beginning of something that would echo across generations. Few people know this, but one of the most sung hymns in the entire world was born out of this man's almost unbearable pain. A hymn that speaks not only of music, but of faith in the middle of life's fiercest storms. A hymn that has brought comfort to millions over the centuries. Before we dive into this journey, let's step back in time and imagine the world in which this story began. It was the 19th century, an era of profound transformation. In the United States, cities were growing rapidly, trade was booming, and families were striving to build a better future. Religion was deeply woven into daily life. Churches were full, hymns echoed during services and family gatherings. Faith wasn't just a belief, it was the center of life. But it was also a time when tragedy could strike brutally and without warning. Fires, epidemics, shipwrecks, they filled the headlines of the day. Life could feel safe one moment, and in the next, everything could collapse. And it was in this world of contrasts, between hope and despair, between faith and pain, that the story of this hymn was born. A story not just about one man or his family, but about something that connects all of us, the pain of loss and the search for comfort, because deep down, we all know what it feels like when the ground suddenly disappears beneath our feet. Maybe it was the loss of someone you loved, maybe the death of a dream you thought was certain, or maybe it was one of those days when life changes so suddenly, so cruelly, that it feels impossible to go on. It's in those moments that the hardest questions rise up. How do I endure this? Where can I find strength? Is there really peace in the middle of such suffering? And it's here, right here, that Horatio Spafford's story collides with ours, because even in the depths of indescribable pain, he found a way to declare something that almost seems impossible. It is well with my soul. This is not a fairy tale. This is a true account of a man who lost almost everything, and yet found the strength to sing. A song that even today crosses borders, cultures, and generations. Get ready, because throughout this story, you'll discover that the words of this hymn carry not only poetry, but also tears, sorrow, faith, and courage. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of this journey, you will never sing "It is well with my soul" the same way again. In the heart of 19th century America, there was a city bursting with hope and growth, Chicago. The streets were alive with movement. Buildings began to rise with grandeur, and commerce attracted people from every corner of the nation. It was a time of great opportunity, and many dreamed of making this city the stage for a prosperous life. Among the most respected names in this rising society was Horatio Gates Spafford, a successful lawyer known not only for his brilliance, but also for his generosity. A wise businessman skilled at turning opportunities into prosperity. But beyond wealth and status, he was remembered as a man of deep faith, actively involved in his church and dedicated to helping those in need. To the community, he was a living example of integrity and hope. By his side was his wife, Anna Larsen Spafford, a Norwegian-born woman, steadfast in her faith and devoted to her family. Together, they built a home that seemed blessed in every way. They had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. Their home echoed with the laughter of children, while the love of their parents created an atmosphere of warmth and security. It was the portrait of a family that was happy, prosperous, and deeply respected. To an outside eye, it seemed they had everything anyone could ever desire: faith, love, stability, and a bright future. Horatio was admired not only for his work, but also for his character. And Anna, always present, cared tenderly for the children while keeping their household steady amid the bustling rhythm of the city. But life, so seemingly unshakable, has its mysteries, and it was precisely when everything appeared perfect that the first cracks began to appear. Because, as so often happens, it is in moments of greatest security that the unexpected suddenly knocks at the door. Let's pause here for a moment. Think about your own life. Have you ever experienced a season where it felt like nothing could possibly go wrong, when the future seemed certain and every step felt perfectly in place, and then, in an instant, everything changed? That's exactly what happened to Horatio and his family. A life that seemed indestructible was about to be shaken by losses no one could have imagined. Fate, cruel and unpredictable, was beginning to write a new chapter in their story. A chapter that would forever transform not only their lives, but the lives of millions around the world. And it's at this very point that our journey moves toward the first great tragedy. The fire that would devastate Chicago and shatter the foundations of everything Horatio had built. It was October of 1871. Chicago, the booming city that symbolized progress, was suddenly struck by a tragedy that would go down in history. What began as a small spark inside a barn turned into a raging storm of fire that devoured entire streets. The wind blew fiercely, feeding the flames like an insatiable monster. In just 2 days, more than 17,000 buildings were reduced to ashes. Smoke could be seen for miles, and the heat was so intense that the very ground seemed to burn. Among those devastated by the destruction was Horatio Spafford. His real estate investments, the result of years of labor and perseverance, were swallowed by the fire in mere hours. Buildings, properties, dreams, all gone, turned to dust and ashes. At that time, there was no insurance system like we have today. When something was lost, it was simply lost. No compensation, no government aid, no quick recovery. It was the end. Now imagine the weight of that moment. A respected man, prosperous, providing for his family with dignity, suddenly staring into the face of ruin. And as if that weren't enough, shortly after came an even more heartbreaking blow: the death of his young son. A little boy who filled their home with life and hope, now silenced by an untimely death. The sequence of tragedies seemed endless. First, the material wealth, all consumed in a single devastating fire. Then the joy of his son, irreversibly torn away. The contrast was brutal, from a life of comfort and stability to nights of silence, tears and uncertainty. Pause for a moment and think. Perhaps you too have felt the ground disappear beneath your feet. That moment when everything seemed on track, but suddenly within hours or days, your entire life changed. It's like walking on solid ground, only to fall without warning into a deep abyss. That is exactly what Horatio lived through. And it wasn't only about external losses, it was about internal ones, because each tragedy struck his heart, his faith, and the very meaning of life. How do you keep believing when everything seems to collapse? How do you hold on to hope when the future is nothing but a blur? The Spafford family's life was no longer the same. What once echoed with laughter and prosperity was now overshadowed by grief and the struggle to stand again. Fate, unyielding and merciless, seemed determined to strip Horatio of everything he held dear. But this was only the beginning of the trials to come, because even after losing almost everything, the greatest sorrow had yet to unfold. And it would be in the midst of that indescribable pain that a hymn would be born, a hymn destined to echo through the centuries. It was the year 1873. Chicago was still slowly recovering from the devastating fire that had reduced the city to ashes. Horatio Spafford, even in the midst of financial ruin and the grief of losing his young son, searched for strength to move forward. He believed that a trip could bring relief to his family, a time of rest away from painful memories. And so he decided to send his wife Anna and their 4 daughters to Europe. The plan was to join them a few weeks later, after taking care of business matters that kept him from leaving right away. At their farewell, Horatio embraced each one of them, never imagining that this would be the last touch he'd share with 3 of his daughters. It was a goodbye filled with hope, yet shadowed by an unexplainable sense of foreboding that would only make sense later. The ship chosen was the SS Ville du Havre, a French transatlantic liner, luxurious, modern, and considered safe for its time. Passengers boarded with excitement, musicians, merchants, entire families searching for new opportunities in Europe. Children ran through the hallways while adults gathered on deck, gazing at the endless oceans stretching before them. Picture the scene. The sun reflecting on the waters, the cold wind brushing against their faces, the feeling of adventure mixed with peace. Anna cared for the girls, settling them into their cabin, telling stories to make the long voyage lighter. It felt like a new beginning, hope after so much suffering, but the ocean, with all its beauty, also carries dark secrets. On the night of November 22nd, 1873, as the Ville du Havre crossed the Atlantic, disaster crept silently in the darkness. Another ship, the cargo vessel Loch Earn, appeared suddenly out of the night. In just moments, the collision happened. The impact was so violent, it shook passengers awake in panic. Screams echoed through the corridors. Water rushed quickly into the hull, and in less than 15 minutes, the Ville du Havre began to sink. Chaos consumed everything. Mothers searched desperately for their children. Sailors struggled to launch lifeboats, but there was no time. Amid the terror was Anna, holding on to her 4 daughters, Annie, Maggie, Bessie, and Tanetta. She tried with all her strength to keep them together, embracing them, praying, pleading for a miracle. But the sea's power was merciless. The freezing, violent waters pulled bodies and debris in every direction. As the ship gave way to the ocean, Anna and her girls were thrown into the waves. She fought to hold on to them, clinging desperately, but the currents were stronger than her arms. And then, a heartbreaking moment, the small hands of her daughters slipping away from her fingers, one by one, until only the silence of the sea remained. Anna lost all 4 before her very eyes, powerless to stop it. She herself was rescued unconscious by a sailor clinging to a piece of wood. When she awoke, she was aboard a rescue vessel. The children were gone. Days later, safely on land, Anna sent a brief telegram to Horatio in Chicago. It contained only 3 words: "Saved alone." 3 words that carried the weight of a shattered world. 3 words that pierced Horatio's heart like a sword. Pause for a moment. What would you do if you received such news? If all your hope, all your joy, all the very reason for your life were torn away in an instant? How could anyone endure such unbearable sorrow when no human word is enough to console? In that moment, silence was the only response. And it's within this silence that the music should begin, slow, mournful, almost like a whisper, so the heart of the listener feels the weight of this tragedy. But as impossible as it may seem, something greater was still to be born out of this darkness, and from this ocean of grief would rise one of the most powerful declarations of faith ever written. After receiving Anna's devastating telegram, Horatio knew he had to go to her. There was no time to lose. With a heart shattered in pieces, he boarded a ship bound for Europe, not as a traveler in search of rest, but as a father and husband searching for an impossible comfort. The crossing of the Atlantic this time carried a different weight. Every wave that rose before the vessel seemed to whisper with the voices of the daughters he would never see again. The sea, which for so many was a symbol of adventure and beauty, had become for Horatio a vast tomb, deep and silent. Picture him on the deck, alone, staring at the endless horizon. The cold wind cut against his face. The sway of the waters mirrored the instability of his soul. And each night, as he closed his eyes, the scene returned, the small hands of his daughters slipping away forever. Days later, the captain approached him. With a grave expression and a low voice, he pointed to the sea. It was here. At that very spot, the Ville du Havre had sunk. Beneath those waves lay the bodies of his 4 little girls. The silence was absolute. There were no words, only the distant sound of waves striking against the ship's hull. And it was there, in that very place, at that very moment, when grief threatened to crush his soul, that something extraordinary happened. Instead of being swallowed by despair, Horatio turned to God. Not with screams of anger, but with a broken heart still reaching for hope. On that deck, he began to write words that seemed impossible to emerge from such sorrow. They weren't just verses, they were a hymn of faith rising from the ruins of his life. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. The waves that had swallowed his daughters became a metaphor in his song. When sorrows like sea billows roll, it was as if he transformed an ocean of grief into a hymn of trust. Here lies the most powerful contrast in the entire story. In the very place where anyone else might have lost their faith, Horatio declared that his soul was at peace. In the midst of the fiercest storm, he sang of hope. And that is the question that still echoes today. How is it possible to sing in the middle of life's greatest storm? How could a man who had lost almost everything still proclaim, "It is well with my soul"? The answer was not in himself, nor in any human circumstance. It was in his faith in Christ, in the certainty that even when everything collapses, there is a God who remains. Horatio never regained his daughters. The memories of the tragedy never disappeared, but on that ship, sailing the very waters that had become the symbol of his pain, he wrote what would become one of the most powerful hymns in Christian history. It was living proof that faith is not the absence of suffering, but the strength to endure it without being destroyed. The words Horatio wrote in the middle of the Atlantic did not remain only on paper. When they reached the hands of composer Philip Bliss, a close friend of the Spafford family, something extraordinary happened. Bliss was one of the most respected Christian musicians of the 19th century, known for creating melodies that deeply touched the soul. As he read the verses, he immediately realized there was something different, something that could not simply be spoken. It was as if those words were pleading to be sung. Bliss then composed a melody that was solemn, yet filled with hope. It was not festive music, but neither was it purely sorrowful. It was a hymn that began in tears, but ended in faith, perfectly mirroring Horatio's journey. And so the hymn was born. In English, it became known as "It Is Well With My Soul." The first time it was performed in public was unforgettable. Ordinary people, accustomed to the struggles of life, heard those words and immediately saw themselves within them. Men and women carrying grief, illness, poverty, or persecution found in the hymn a comfort that no theological discourse could ever provide. It was as if Horatio spoke for everyone who had ever wept before an inexplicable loss. Soon, the hymn began to echo in churches across the United States. Every note, every line carried not only the story of one family, but also the testimony that faith can turn tragedy into hope. Believers sang with tears in their eyes, yet with a serene smile upon their lips. Here lies the powerful contrast. A hymn born from the deepest sorrow of a father became a song of comfort for millions. The same waves that had taken his daughters became verses that crossed oceans and generations. The music, born out of darkness, now illuminated countless hearts. And that is the greatness of this story. The suffering of one man was transformed into hope for multitudes. As the years passed, the hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," ceased to be just the story of Horatio Spafford and his family. It crossed continents, was translated into dozens of languages, and became part of diverse cultures. Whether in English, Portuguese, Spanish, German, or Korean, the message remained the same. Faith can bring peace in the midst of pain. This hymn has been present at funerals of ordinary people and also of influential leaders. It has been sung in small churches with only a handful of voices and in crowded stadiums filled with thousands of believers, always carrying the same power of comfort. Many testify that in times of grief, singing this hymn was like finding strength to take the next step. Tears flowed, but there was also a strange serenity, as if God himself whispered hope through the melody. Time has not diminished its strength. On the contrary, it has only made it more timeless. Generation after generation continues to be moved by its words, because everyone at some point faces storms in life. Everyone knows what it is to suffer loss, and everyone longs for comfort. Here lies the key. This hymn does not speak of a life without suffering. It does not promise freedom from pain. It speaks of a faith that endures, a faith that remains standing even when everything else collapses, a faith that in the face of death and tragedy can still declare, it is well with my soul." The story of Horatio Spafford is, above all, a testimony of the strength of faith in the face of suffering. A man who lost almost everything, his wealth, his son, and his 4 daughters, transformed his tragedy into something greater than himself. His words, written on the deck of a lonely ship, became a hymn that crossed continents and generations. A hymn that does not promise the absence of storms, but offers hope, comfort, and the certainty that peace can be found even when the world falls apart. The pain of one man became hope for millions. And every time someone sings, "It is well with my soul," they are reminded of this truth, that real faith is not the absence of storms, but the courage to walk through them without losing your soul. And now I leave you with one question. And you, have you found peace, even in the midst of the storm?
Peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well soul. O Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight. The heavens be rolled back like a scroll. The drum shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.